You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. Welcome to the podcast. This is Christian Peterson. I will be your host today. And today we are going to be talking about sex and the problems and issues that sometimes arise around the topics of sex and intimacy. Sonika and I just led our Possibilities of Sex workshop here in Northern California. And on this podcast, I will share some of the topics and issues that were discussed and that we worked on during this workshop. Of course, in the hopes that it will be useful for you, the listener, and it will be useful for your experience of sex and intimacy and how you are able to talk about sex and intimacy in your relationship world. So today I'll be talking about topics such as, why do we stop having sex? Why does sex seem to fall to the bottom of the priority list? What happens if you're a single person or you have no sexual partner? How is sex even relevant for you? What happens when sex becomes boring or predictable over time? How do we talk about sex with our partners? What do we do when we get triggered or upset around our sexual interactions? How to receive or reject sexual advances? How do you go for initiating sex? And how do you respond to a partner who initiates sex, whether you want to say yes or no to the initiation or the advance? What happens when one person wants sex and the other person doesn't? How do you go about having sex when you're not in the mood, so to speak? When one or both of you aren't in the mood, then what? I'm going to talk a little bit about our sexual, in quote, sexual love language. What is it that turns you on? What is it that turns your partner on? What kind of initiation actually works and will land for your partner? What happens to us when we get to enjoy sexual expression and sex life? And what happens to us when we don't get to have sex, when we don't get to enjoy the expression of our sexual personalities and sexual energies? How do we make sex a priority in our lives, in our very busy lives? And why would we even want to make sex a priority in our lives? So those are some of the topics that we'll cover in this discussion. And I'll say, of course, we just came off a workshop that takes place over 2 full days, a Saturday and a Sunday. So not attempting to address everything that happened in our workshop, but I do want to give some useful input about the topics that we hear from we have heard over our many, many years of working with this topic, that we have heard from literally thousands of both couples and singles. And as we get started here, let me just say that for the purposes of this sharing and this episode, I will be talking mostly through the lens of partnered sexuality. So assuming that you're listening, that you have a partner to have sex with. Now, often we get the question, and in our workshop, we have both couples and singles, and we have couples where just one partner shows up to the workshop, which is all totally great, and they get a lot out of it. It actually would be a great topic for a whole separate podcast episode to how to deal with sex and sexuality and intimacy for someone who is either single or doesn't have currently a sexual partner. And sometimes, I used to think that myself when I didn't have sexual partners or I was single. I was like, is that even relevant for me other than just jerking off here and there? It is highly relevant. It was highly relevant for me, and I would say it's highly relevant for anyone who is a sexual person because, well, that's just the thing. We are sexual beings. There is this force and urge built into us to express it, and it's so much more than just the having someone to have intercourse with. It impacts how we show up in life. Well, let's say whether I enjoy and express my sexuality will have a very direct impact on how I show up in every aspect of my world, how I show up at work, how I show up with my friends, how I show up in whatever communities I'm part of, how I show up in my family. There are some people who say that you can look at a person and you can see if they are currently in touch with their sexuality, if they're currently enjoying sex, because it makes us happier looking and shinier looking, and it makes our eyes brighter and our skin brighter, and it makes us walk more upright and puts a grin on our face. It puts us like a smile on my heart, both on the inside and the outside. So if you're a single person, I encourage you to still listen to this, because there is going to be a lot of this that will be highly useful for both insights around your last relationship and for your next relationship. So with that, let's dive on in here. I want to start with a quote from Dr. Ian Kerner, who's an internationally renowned author, sex therapist, and psychologist. And Dr. Kerner says, sex seems to be rapidly falling to the bottom of America's to-do list. But in my experience, when couples stop having sex, their relationships become vulnerable to anger, detachment, infidelity, and ultimately divorce. I believe that sex matters. It's the glue that keeps us together, and without it, couples become good friends at best or bickering roommates at worst. End of quote. And it was interesting in our workshop we just had how many people used that exact term that was before we shared this quote, used the term that sex is somehow serves as the glue that keeps us together. So why is it that it's such a common experience for couples that over time, after the heydays of the honeymoon phase kind of wane, and we're past the first year or 2 or 3 in our relationship, why is it such a common experience that sex just gets less and less and less? We simply have less frequent sex, we have less interesting sex, and for many of us, we simply stop having sex altogether. I know for some, sex is not such a big issue, and the sex life does keep flowing, and there is a good quantity and quality of it, and it's not such a big issue. But for the majority of people in our experience, it does become an issue, and there tends to be less and less and less of it over time. And when we ask people, and when they tell us, what they will say themselves is, well, it's just there's just so much stress in my world. There's the kids are demanding so much of us. By the time we're ready for bed, we're just wiped out. Work is so stressful. Life is stressful. Or, my body hurts. I have this or that condition that doesn't allow me to move properly. And, or my yoni hurts, or I can't get a decent erection. There's all these good reasons why sex falls off the priority list. And there are other reasons why sex becomes more and more scarce. For example, we're not so easily turned on after a while. There's something about the sheer newness of a new partner that inspires good hormones in our brains and our bodies that is a turn on. New and varied things are generally inspiring and motivating to us humans. So when I've had sex with the same partner for 5 years, there's a tendency, if I don't do something about it, there's a tendency for me to just get bored with it. It's not as inspiring and motivating to have sex anymore. I'm not as easily turned on. And frankly, we tend to get a bit lazy about it, because in the beginning, I'm just like turned on. I'm just turned on by my partner. I don't really have to work for it or do anything deliberate about it. But that often changes over time. So now I have to do something different. I have to find something new, and I have to begin to create it more. And often we frankly get a bit lazy, and we also just assume that that's just the way of it. That, okay, yeah, great, it was awesome in the beginning, and now it's like, yeah, ho-hum, but it's pretty good, so no need to really do anything different about that. Yet another reason why we begin to have less sex and less closeness and less intimacy is because we get triggered and upset or hurt in other areas of our relationship. It could be around interactions around the kids, or interactions around not feeling seen or heard or judged. It doesn't have to have anything specifically to do with our sex life, but when there are incompletions and hurts or injuries from other areas in our life, it's very hard to open up. At least for some of us, it's very hard to open up and be vulnerable and open and naked, both metaphorically and literally naked with our partner, when there are these hang-ups from other areas. So when we have that, we got to find a way to, well, actually, I'll talk more about how to deal with that. But that is another reason why we have less and less sex, is when there are hurts and injuries from other areas in our relationship. And the final reason I'll add for why sex and intimacy often gets less and less over time is when we've had the experience of trying to initiate sex with our partner and we've been rejected, if we have the experience that it doesn't matter how I ask, or if for some reason my partner isn't receptive, we tend to stop asking. If we get a lot of no's, we just tend to stop asking over times, because it kind of hurts when I put myself out there and I get a no in response to my advances or my desires. Now, the good news here is that it is perfectly realistic and doable in almost all cases to reinvigorate and re-enliven our sex life. It never fails that at our sex workshops, for example, we will have couples come in who are, just like we did this past weekend, who are scared about having the conversation about sex because they have gotten so out of the habit of having sex, let alone talking about it, if they even ever did. So it's very normal that we'll see couples coming in who have not had any sex at all for 5 years or for 10 years at all. And it never fails that some of these couples on Saturday night, after just one day in our workshop environment, will go have a wonderful lovemaking session on Saturday night. It never fails. And that is because, of course, we deliberately, in an environment like this, we deliberately cultivate and help facilitate a conversation about it. And we help bring people into their bodies. Sex is an activity that is enjoyed through our bodies. So it can't be done if we are, as the popular saying goes, all in our heads. It has to be somehow, we have to engage the pleasure mechanisms in our physical bodies for sex to be possible, let alone a pleasurable experience. And it always happens that even couples who come in and thinking that it's all over will have a wonderful lovemaking experience. So that's the good news. Even if you've all but forgotten it and there's a lot of injury or hurt around it, don't think that that means it's the end of it, or that you can't bring that to a place of having marvelous, high, deep lovemaking sessions with your beloved, because that is absolutely possible. So now let me share some useful tips and tricks and insights about how to further our sexual experience and the sexual conversation. And where I'll start is that it is so supremely important that when our partner offers sex or asks for sex, how we receive that or not. Because imagine you're the one initiating sex with your partner. However you do that, and you get a no. Sometimes that really hurts, because there is a vulnerability in coming to my partner and saying, "Hey, I'd like to have sex with you. I'd like to enjoy this experience with you. Would you have sex with me?" However I do the initiation. It is really important that if you're the one being asked, that you receive that offer or that question gracefully and compassionately. So if your partner asks you, for example, "Do you want to have sex tonight?" Make sure your response is not, "No, I don't have time for that. Why do you always want to have sex? Is that all you ever think about?" Because when that is your response, you might as well slap your partner in the face. That might actually be even easier to deal with, because a response like that really hurts. So we want to acknowledge the positive intent when we are being asked about sex or for sex. So if my partner says to me, "Would you have sex with me?" or "I really want to have sex with you," or "It's been a long time, I miss being naked with you," my first response is, "Thank you so much for asking," or "Wow, that's great that you want that," or "Thanks for wanting to be close with me," or "Thanks for wanting to have an interaction like that," because I'm acknowledging the positive intent that's behind an advance like that. There always is a positive intent. And then it's okay for me to say no to that if it doesn't work for me or if I don't want to, but still I'm going to start it out by saying, "Thank you so much for asking. Thank you so much for wanting that. And, it doesn't really work for me tonight, but I wonder if we could find another time." And that's another really great way to do that. You start with a thank you. Somehow you positively acknowledge the intent of the advance, and then you can say yes or no. And if you do say no, it's really nice if you can to offer what's another option. And this really comes into the broader topic of conflict resolution. And this is true too for when you have when you get triggered or upset or hurt around any conversation around sex. Or maybe you got triggered or hurt around another conversation that happened around the breakfast table in your family. It has nothing to do with sex, but you still feel the ouch of it as it comes into the next time to have sex. That these are the general skills of conflict resolution and communicating around difficult things. Sonika and I, we spend a lot of time coaching both individuals and couples on how to have conversations like that. We have a whole workshop on that we call the gift of conflict for how to deal with conflict resolution. And it's really no different whether the topic is around having sex or how much sex we have, or whether it's around how we raise our children or how we deal with our money or how we talk to each other. So a good idea for how to deal with that, if there are things that are incomplete or you have hang-ups or injuries from a previous time, is to not try to solve them while you're in the middle of trying to get sex going. Like, do that at another time when you're in a good space. Sunday morning, when you have some space and time around you, then say, hey, there's something I'd like to talk to you about. Or you remember that time, that interaction we had on Monday where I got mad about so-and-so. That didn't quite go how I'd like it to go. I'd like to do a do-over on that. Or can we talk about that? And then you start that conversation. Because having a generally freed up space between you will make it so much easier to open yourselves up and be vulnerable enough and naked enough to have a good sexual interaction later. Another very common conflict that we get presented with around sex is when one person wants much more sexual interaction than the other. Often, as you might have experienced at various points in your life, that turns into a terrible power struggle where one person is always pulling and pushing for more. Why can't you ever have sex with me? And the other person is trying to fend off the advances. There's a common stereotype that this always happens because men want way more sex and women want way less sex. And it's always the man wanting more, and the women saying no. And I want to say, in our experience, that is, I don't know if that was ever true or how true that was, but that is definitely not the case anymore based on our experience. It is just as common that a woman in a relationship really is pulling for and wanting more sexual interaction, and it's the man who's saying no. Either way, you could say it's a conflict when one person wants a lot more than the other. So how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with that in the same way that we deal around other conflicts. Whether it's the same type of conflict. Say, I want to buy a new car, but my wife doesn't. Or I want us to be more disciplinarians with our kids, but my wife want to be more laissez-faire. It's the same type of conflict. And what we're looking for is for both of us, these are general rules of thumb for how to deal with this type of conflict. And we have other podcasts where we go into more detail about that specific topic. But the general rule of thumb is we want to both get to share our point. And you both want to listen to what the positive intent is on your partner's point of view. Why is it that they want more sex? There's always a good reason for why your partner wants more sex. He or she is wanting something much more than just, intercourse. Just as well as there is always a good reason and a positive intent behind the person who's saying no thank you to sex. But often those positive intents, we never get to them because we get so upset about the yes or the no that we don't get to look at the deeper aspects of the conversation. Once we have looked at, okay, what is the positive intention behind the yes or behind the no, then we go for creating a win-win situation. And really around sex, as around with other conflicts, but maybe particularly around sex, it's also a matter of switching our conviction and switching our belief so that we believe there is a way we can both have what we want. We often when one person says yes, the other person says no, we just think, okay, well, that's it then. We can't both have sex and not have sex, so that's it. We're stuck here. But that's never the case. There are always so many more openings. It's really helpful if we get a little more broad in our perspective around what sex means. For a lot of us, that certainly used to be true for me in, the majority of my adult life. I just thought sex was just intercourse, maybe oral sex, and that was it. It never really occurred to me to broaden the definition of that, and which I, of course, now do, and really to think about the sex means so many things. It means touching. It means kissing. It means being cuddled up. It means being naked together. It means putting my tongue on various places of your body. It means running my hands over your body. It means I could be the one. So this is an example of what Sonika and I have sometimes come up with, for example, I want sex and she's not in the mood for having full-on intercourse, or for something, maybe she's in pain in her body and there's some reason why she's not willing or wanting to go there right now. I have, for example, ended up touching myself while she was there with me in bed. Or she has ended up just touching me, but without having me have to come inside her. And we've gotten creative in a fashion that allowed us to, in effect, me have sex and her not have sex, if you went by the old definition. So it's really important that we just get creative and that we believe, yeah, there is a way we can both have what we want, because most often there is. There is also a whole other way to think about conflicts and triggers around sex, and a whole other way to go about it, which Sonika and I actually very often practice. And that is to include absolutely everything into our sexual world, into our sexual activity, into our lovemaking sessions. So that, I know I just told you 5 minutes ago that if you have previous hang-ups or injuries, it's a good idea to find another time, not around your sex, to have a good conversation or get some help around that, so that you are in a clear space when you enter into sex. And I still stand by that. And there's also, you could say, an advanced way, or which is really great, is to include everything into our lovemaking. So Sonika and I will, for example, do that even if we are in the middle, we're all naked and hot at it in bed, and something shows up that disturbs the flow of our lovemaking. It could be either just a wayward thought in my head. It could be me thinking just internally, nothing to do with Sonika or anything else, just me thinking I'm not doing it right, or getting distracted by something that's going to happen tomorrow. Or it could be that my partner just told me something that I got triggered about, or told me I thought that I wasn't doing something right. Anything that happens to interrupt the flow of it. What we often tend to do when that happens is we just try to ignore it and plow it over, but we can both feel that something isn't the same. So what we do is we just include everything. We consider lovemaking in our sexual world. It's like a cauldron, or a place where it's like this cauldron where energy and emotion can be transmuted by the force of our sexuality and by the force of our love. So we're not afraid to have, if irritation or injury or hurt or anger or fear shows up in the middle of it, we just kind of include it into our cauldron, stir it around, and it gets transmuted. But it does require a willingness to change pace and to look at and talk about triggers even in the middle of it. So Sonika and I, like I said, for example, we might be hot at it, going at it in bed and having a great time, and then something shows up that interrupts the flow. We will actually stop in the middle and just say it. We will say things like, when you just made that comment about how I'm moving, I actually felt kind of triggered around that, and I noticed it disturbed my presence. Really what I want is to be fully present with you and with me here. And yeah, that actually took me a little bit out. And then we'll have that conversation for however long is required. And then that will just be part of it. And another thing that's really important in order to be able to do that is we don't have a set expectation that our sexual interaction should follow a certain course. So for example, you could say the standard course is we start with some amount of foreplay, and then we get to intercourse, and then we hopefully both have an orgasm, and then we're done. It follows this set formula. So if you can be willing to let go of that formula and just have your sexual interaction be whatever it is, that makes it a lot easier to incorporate anything that happens. and to go a little more for the journey rather than the destination. In our experience, it's severely limiting to us when we get too focused on, okay, we both have to get to the orgasm point and then we're done. Because really, what is it we're wanting with sex? And that's a whole other topic that we talk a lot about in this workshop. What is it that we get out of sex? So in our workshop, we set up different ways where both men and women, both in separate and together, get to talk about what is it that sex really and truly provides for us. I know Sonika made another great podcast episode where she talks about how to have high transcendental sex. I very much encourage you to go listen to that because she'll talk more about that too. But in the short version of that is, there's a stereotype often out there, and I used to think that myself, is that all I'm wanting with sex is to get off, to relieve the pressure, and to get some sort of conquest and get laid, and that's it. And that is such a limited and it's false and inaccurate assessment of what it is we're looking for when we're having sex. When you actually ask people, you will hear things like, sex puts color in my world. Sex allows me to be in my body and get out of my head. Sex allows me to feel tremendous and deep love for my partner in a way that I want to do anything and everything for him or her. Sex allows me to connect with spirit, to God, to the divine aspects of life. Sex allows me to be a better worker or a better boss or to communicate better with my friends or my kids. Sex has this tingling beauty ripple through my entire body and I feel like a different person. And that's just a tiny segment of what people have told us. So whenever we are engaged in sex, really those are the things that we are trying to get out of it and that we do get out of it when it's wonderful. Now, let's talk about another thing that people often will tell us for why sex doesn't happen is that, we're just not in the mood. By the time I'm done with my day and the 1,000 responsibilities I have, I am wiped and the furthest thing on my mind is sex. This will often be true for one or both parties in a partnership. The biggest problem with that is that we have this assumption that we should be able to just be in the mood. Like we have this idea that we should just be able to go from work, responsibilities, and then boom, when it's time for sex, we're just there and in the mood. And sure, for some of us, that used to be the case. When I was 20, I was in the mood all the time, no matter what. You could just, anytime, anywhere. That's no longer the case. And it's an unrealistic expectation that we would be able to do that we would be able to switch our mood and our energy and our emotional states and our physical states that fast. So it really helps if you just think that shouldn't be the case. Even if you're not in the mood, you can still start the activities of intimacy, of touch, of pleasuring, of getting closer, and of winding down. Often this is a matter of simply slowing down your pace, getting yourself out of your head and more into your body. And there are many ways that can begin to happen. You can hold each other's hand. If it was me, I could go take Sonika's hand and walk around the house or just put my arms around her while she finishes up her work on her computer. Or we could take a shower together while we talk about our day. Or we could just go to bed and lay down naked next to each other and touch each other a little bit. Just my hand on her skin will begin to get both of us in our bodies more. And that could be a way to get it started. If I think that both of us have to be all hot and wound up and totally turned on before we start, then often nothing happens because that's not where we are at the end of our day. So help yourself and your partner get started by slowing down, beginning to touch, and getting a little more into that space. And often you'll find that if you just start the activities of touching or kissing or getting close to one another in some way, little by little, the inspiration and the arousal and the physical turn on will just come as a result of that. A great tip you can also take advantage of is you can explore. We do this in some of our workshops too. You can explore for yourself or with your partner what are the things that help to turn you on fast. And you can think about this just for yourself, and then you can ask your partner. So just consider for yourself, what are the things that help turn you on fast? If I were to give examples like that, I can just think about hot lovemaking sessions I've had with Sonika, and I can turn myself on that way pretty fast, just imagining like this little memory movie in my mind. I can begin to touch myself. That will get me into my body and begin to spread the pleasure pretty fast. And when I think about what turns me on fast that Sonika can do for me, if she comes up really close to me and looks me straight in the eyes and kisses me, that turns me on pretty fast, gets me in my body quickly. She sometimes, she can put her hand straight on my crotch. That really works. I know I can come and put my arms around her. That works, I know, for me. So ask your partner what works for them, and ask yourself and explore with your partner what are the things that will help get you in your body rather quickly. And then you can use those activities and tricks for when it's time. And another thing that Sonika and I, we simply have made up is because we often are in the same situation that everybody is in this world, that we have very long days with lots of responsibilities and lots of work and lots of people and lots of stuff and stimuli. So by the time it's 10 or 11 or whatever, and it's that time of day, we are pretty damn tired. So we have simply made up that half an hour of lovemaking counts for 2 hours of sleep. And I can't scientifically prove that, although I wouldn't be surprised if you could. But it's a really good thing to tell ourselves in order to not use it as an excuse that we are too tired, because that could be the case so often. So we just tell ourselves and remind ourselves, well, if we do make love for half an hour, that's as good as 2 hours of sleep. And why would we do that? Like, why would we want to make sure that we keep sex alive? Well, there's the practical reason that in the quote I shared from Dr. Kerner in the beginning, that when we don't have sex, that part gets weak in our relationship. We become vulnerable to anger, detachment, infidelity, and ultimately divorce. But even if I don't look at it that grimly, we just know that when we don't enjoy sexual connection with each other, it has an impact on how lined up or synchronized or on the same page we feel. We notice we get easier disturbed by little stupid things, or we get more edgy, or we get more irritated. And there's just this feeling that we're not quite on the same page. On the other hand, when we are sexual, when we do explore that side of ourselves and share that with each other, we just know that it spreads, the goodness of that spreads to all areas of our lives. Like I was sharing a little bit about before, what it is sex provides for us. It also provides something for our union, for our relationship, for our marriage. It makes it stronger. I totally agree with what the quote I shared, that it works like a glue that holds us together. And we just notice that it's, the connection I feel with Sonika after we make love is tangible in a way that pretty much nothing else is. It makes our love tangible and feelable, like something real I can feel in my hands and my feet and my shoulders and my head in a way that pretty much nothing else does. So that's why we choose to keep sex alive even when we're tired. And it's a really great exploration. So I'll give you this suggestion, is to look at, why is that important? What's a reason that's important enough for you to go through sometimes the discomfort and sometimes the difficult conversations? But what's important enough that you would keep your sex life alive and well? Is it that it makes you feel more healthy, more connected, that you show up better at work, that you love each other better, that you argue less, that you get less angry? Whatever it is for you, it's really important that you have a reason that's important enough to keep you going. Because as we've mentioned several times, there are always lots of reasons to not. there's so many good reasons for why I could be doing something else. That's why we have this experience often that sex completely disappears from the priority list because I'm tired and it hurts and the kids and work and so on and so forth. And this is true even if you're a single person or you don't have currently a sexual partner. To find some way to keep your sexual expression and your sexual energy alive. I know it was a big breakthrough for me when I was single many years before I met Sonica. And one of the big breakthroughs I had was beginning to understand the role that my sexual energy and the energy of physical pleasure played for me even as a single man. So I began to create pleasure sessions, as I called it, with myself, even without having a partner. Instead of just jerking off whenever I felt the physical pressure, I began to have actual pleasuring sessions and pleasuring activities just by myself. And it awoke this sexual energy in me in a completely different way than I had otherwise. I always thought that was only possible with a partner. So even if you're a single person or you don't currently have a sexual partner, still it's important to look at what is the reason for you to keep your sexual expression alive, to not just forget about it till you have some awesome person show up you can have sex with. What's a good reason for you? It has certainly always been our experience that when we take the time and we make the priority to keep our sexual activity and our sex life alive, that we are endlessly rewarded with connection and better health and the kind of synchronization both internally with ourselves and our bodies and our own spirits and with each other. So we hope you'll find this information useful. I also encourage you to go check out the other episodes we have about sex. We have episode 13. Sonica did an amazing episode about how to have high transcendental sex. And you can check out episode 27, where I interviewed Veronica Monet, who is a former escort and now sexologist and sex coach who has a very personal and unique perspective on sex. So thank you very much for listening in here today. I appreciate you being with me, and I hope this conversation was useful for you. And here is to our continued and enjoyable sexual expression. You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be useful, would you go ahead and hit the share button and share this with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are. Thanks so much for sharing the love. And you can find more about our work at loveworksforyou.com. Thank you.